First President Bush, Mr. Clinton, the second Mr. Bush, and Mr. Obama have all made it their business to lie to the American people, to insist that somehow we're being attacked because of what we think here in North America or how we live, rather than what the United States government has done. And the core of the problem is intervention in other people's business. Part of that intervention, unfortunately, is necessary. We have to defend the Saudis. We have to defend the Bahrainis because we depend on oil. But our support for Israel, our intervention in the South Sudan, for example, the relentless intervention of the United States on issues that are not very important to it is the cause of what's going on. And it's a bipartisan stimulus. It's not just one person. And until we stop that, really, or at least think about stopping it, there's really no chance to stop this war. And that's why so much of al-Qaeda has spread so greatly since 2001.
Our guest, Michael Scheuer, who's also the author of a number of books which we have featured on the C-SPAN networks, including Imperial Hubris, Why the West is Losing the War on Terror, and From Pandora's Box, America and the Militant Islam After Iraq.
Jordan, smaller Muslim country, 6.4 million Muslims. Right now, Hamas is enjoying like a 60% approval rating, so 3.8 million radical Muslims in Jordan, which is, again, a moderate country.
We have a new administration, and we have a very old war. Do you see in the near future or within this administration opportunities for turning points? And we as citizens, what indicators should we be looking for that we have such an opportunity coming?
Truth, for once. What you should look for is an American politician that stands up and says to you, this has nothing to do with your liberty, your freedom, or your elections. It has nothing to do with your daughters going to university. What this war has to do with is what we do in the Islamic world, which is not an indictment of what we do. It's a statement of fact. And once they make that statement of fact, America can have a debate over whether or not we want the policies to remain as they are, or do we want to change. And if we keep them the same, that's the way democracy works. We go forward with them. But at least we'll know that going forward with the same policies means a lot more war, a lot more expense, and a lot more loss of life. I don't expect to see that anytime soon, sir. There's not an American politician who's going to stand up and say that. I do see hope, sir, but unfortunately, in two things. First, our fate is in our own hands. We're the only ones that can change those things that motivate our enemies. And we're the only ones that can apply sufficient force to kill as many of our enemies as we can. My own view is that what's going to change it is another disastrous attack in the United States. When we have 10 or 20 or 30,000 or more dead Americans in this country, Americans will begin to get the hint that their government has not been pursuing a policy that is in their best interests.
Palestinian areas, right? We're sending literally hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian areas. We are, the American taxpayers. 4.3 million Muslims live in the Palestinian areas. 78% of those had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden. 89% support terror attacks on our ally, Israel. 89% support Sharia law. We should give them a state, folks. That's 3.83 million radical Muslims.
Good morning, sir. That's Sylvan, S-Y-L-V-A-N.
Right.
I completely agree with your guest there. The world doesn't really fear us anymore is one problem right there due to our rules of engagement and all this other kind of bunk. But they also, the Muslim world, everything that we do over here is strictly against the Quran. And to them, we're infidels, and we all deserve to die. And that's how that's played out. And thank you very much.
Thank you for the call, Sylvan.
Well, I think that's another popular misconception, and it's also one that's encouraged by the politicians because they don't want you to understand the problem. They want you to be afraid and let them do what they want to do. I would ask you that why the United States hasn't been under constant attack since 1776 by Muslims, because we were and are a Christian-dominated nation. If your argument is correct, we would have been attacked in 1824 and 1874 and 1924, and we weren't. What we're being attacked for is the post-1970-73 expansion of U.S. intervention and interference in the affairs of the Muslim world. And most of all, our support for the Israelis and our support for Arab tyranny.
How about in the West? Okay, let's take it to France. France, 4.7 million Muslims live there. A 2007 poll showed 35% of French Muslims said suicide bombings could sometimes be justified. It's 1.6 million radical Muslims living in France.
No, let me finish here for a moment. Yes. The problem for the world, the problem for the United States, is the animosity in the Muslim world, whether it's Al-Qaeda or any of the other groups affiliated or not affiliated with it, is the impact of U.S. foreign policy. Until that policy changes, the threat to the United States is going to continue to grow. Until we do something about the Saudi relationship and stop using so much oil, until we dump the Israelis and do something in our own interest rather than in Israeli interests, all of this talk is really irrelevant because the war is only going to get worse.
So what you're arguing then that America is basically reaping what it sows around the world, and so as
without question, sir.
And so as international public opinion is infuriated because of the American policies, young extremists are springing here and there without relationship to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan?
Well, certainly what Al-Qaeda has been able to do is to focus the Muslim world on U.S. foreign policy. And that's the animosity that's in the Muslim world toward us. I don't think Americans are hated because they're Americans. They're hated not because of who we are, but because of what we do. Mm-hmm. And until we get a grasp on that, we in America, the threat to America will continue to grow, and with it, the threat to our allies.
Great Britain, 2.8 million Muslims living there. 78% wanted cartoonists of Muhammad legally prosecuted. So we're talking about 2.2 million radical Muslims in Great Britain.
These fighters are not freedom haters, psychopaths, criminals, anti-democrats, or gender equality opposers. Neither are they fighting because of their own illiteracy, unemployment, or the 101 other social problems they encounter on a daily basis. The explanation of their motivation offered to us by the lineal descendants of Rudyard Kipling, who are so firmly and broadly planted in America's bipartisan governing elite. The Islamic insurgents, oppose, and as I said, oppose specific, and as I said, tangible policies, and the actions taken to implement those policies. Whether it is American support for Israel, its presence in Iraq, or its support for the Saudi and Egyptian tyrannies, the discriminatory policy of the Catholic ascendancy in Manila toward Mindanao, or the actions of the Buddhist government in its southern province of Patani, it is policy and policy implementation that form the bulk of the grievances. Without these specific, substantive, and real-world grievances, there would be no insurgencies. There would be only the lethal nuisance of terrorism that we knew in the 1980s and 1990s. We can disagree and debate about whether these policies are sufficient justification for an insurgency, but we must not doubt that they are indeed the insurgency's motivation.
How about here in the United States? Well, we have a very moderate Muslim population. We do. 2.6 million Muslims live here, according to Pew Research. 13% said violence against civilians can be justified. 19% said they were either favorable toward Al-Qaeda or just didn't know. Because who knows, really? That's almost 500,000 radical Muslims here in the United States.
We're being attacked for what our government does, not how Americans think or live. And so
it's not a jihad against American culture and democracy and freedom?
Not at all, sir. Bin Laden and his generation went to school in many ways on the Ayatollah Khomeini. While he lived in Iran, tried to ignite a jihad against the Americans because we were debauched, because of our culture, because women were in the workplace, because we had degenerate movies. No one blew themselves up for that. Even when they destroyed our embassy in Beirut in 1983, they did it under the umbrella of the Ayatollah's rhetoric, but they attacked us because we were on their ground. And so Bin Laden, his lieutenants, other radicals know that no Muslim is going to blow themselves up because my daughters go to university. But an endless number, apparently, will attack and die because of our support for the Israelis.
because of our invasion of Iraq.